Okay, folks, it's 6:11. Anthony will be here at 7 o'clock. Let's get this meeting started because we need to be clear by 7:30 because we have a lot of visitors tonight. Stephanie, are you ready to call roll?
Okay, Anthony Amato, we know is coming. Alan Brown. Here. John Bonuto. Here. Gregory Keva. Michelle Gora. Here. James Hirschfield. Stephanie Kolnick here. Jennifer Pody. Here. Lisa Rausch. Michael Sinatra. Here. Julie Stewart. Here. Pete Tagley. Peter. Here. Great, thank you. We've got quorum.
Okay. Public comment on agenda items. I see not much of a public. They're a little public. Any comment? Hearing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. If there's anything anyone would like to remove, it's only the minutes for the education meeting. We don't have them?
No, we need,
Oops.
we need the executive session minutes from December 18th. And no one sent them in, so we didn't.
There are no minutes for executive session.
Well, no, you have to come in and out.
Oh, no one sent in the in and out.
We need that. We don't have anything.
All right. Well,
So-
we'll hold the,
Yeah.
we'll table the consent agenda's minutes till the next meeting then.
Right,
And make a note to get,
please.
need, yeah. And in, out for next meeting. Okay, moving on to reports and recognition. Since I am not the board's chair, I will not report on anything. We'll move right on to the superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. Just a couple of announcements. Tomorrow night, here at 6 and 7:30, we have the winter concerts for the middle school and the high school that have been rescheduled due to weather, so I hope you'll try to come. We're going to have both tomorrow night, so that should be great fun. I want to thank all of the parents and the volunteers who participated in the Wizards on Saturday night, although I couldn't be here. I heard it was a great, great evening, and really appreciate everyone's participation. And I also want to say a thank you to our custodial staff, who has worked extremely hard in the very, very cold weather, getting our schools ready and our roads ready, and also a special thank you to Don O'Leary and Bob Geeson and the custodial staff here who dealt with the little minor mishap on New Year's Day. So that was difficult on a holiday. And without hesitation, everyone came in and did their part, and we really do appreciate it. And that is my report. Thank you.
Committee reports. Building committee, Greg Kava.
Thank you, Alan. The building committee met tonight. We have, among other things, tentatively approved the revised agreement with the commissioning agent. There are several items that need to be addressed, and once those are addressed, we will have approved that, and we'll be able to move on the commissioning agent. We have been working with some questions related to the, we need to get the architect's contract amended in several respects to take into consideration work that the board authorized the building committee to approve, and we have approved. But there's some questions have arisen, and we're in the process of working those out, and we should hope to have that worked out shortly, and be able to move forward on all of that needs to be done. And that's pretty much where we are. We're in the process of completing the schematic documents, design documents based on the amendment to the plan that resulted from the information we received from T2, and also the design development documents will follow that, and then we'll proceed, once those are completed, to a meeting with DAS, and after that meeting we'll be moving on to construction documents. So that's where the AgSTEM project is. The science lab project is basically the same place.
When's the DAS meeting? Do you know yet?
Well, it depends on when we complete the design development documents, then we'll schedule it. It's a design development review. It's a standard review. They look at them and they say, okay, fine, we're good here, we don't have any questions. And, then you move forward to the next phase. But you want to make sure that you reconnoiter with them at each phase.
Do we have a timeline yet? Is that going to be,
We do. We got an amended timeline tonight. It's not substantially different from the last one. I haven't had a chance to really look at it because our meeting was fairly foreshortened by the fact that it was delayed start due to people being able to get here. So I just literally took a quick look at it. We spent all of 1 minute during the agenda looking at it, and so I'll give you a report if I see anything different. But the delivery dates are still substantially the same.
able to hold to those then?
So far,
Okay, any questions for Greg? Ed Advance, Michelle Gora.
I think you all received emails, but I'm not sure about the legislative breakfasts coming up that are being co-hosted by CABE and Ed Advance and the area at Resks. I'll be attending the January 10th one in Litchfield, but they're also holding one January 16th in Newtown. The CABE areas and the state Resks kind of overlap, so we could attend either one. I think that's all I have.
I think you said in the past, too, that they're the same meetings. You wouldn't have to go to both. It's either or.
No, you wouldn't have to go to both. There will be different people at different ones, and I apologize. I don't know. I get so many emails, and I don't know how many of them go to all of you and how many.
Everyone has. I forwarded them.
Okay, because I received one yesterday or the day before from Ed Advance, as sort of a questionnaire for the breakfast for the 10th, asking for topics of conversation. It's an online document to sort of get a head start so that the breakfast can be more productive. Did everyone get that as well? Yeah? Okay, good. That's it.
Okay. Education, Michael Sinatra.
All right, I have a brief report as well. One of the changes, if you're looking at your future meeting schedule, we are not having a January 29th Education Committee meeting because, as you can see, on February 5th, we're having a meeting, so just a few days away. And for the upcoming meeting on the 22nd, I believe Ali O'Hara is going to be coming and speaking to the board about the school-to-work efforts on behalf of our older special education students. We thought that might be something that a lot of board members are not really aware of, that we do have a obligation for older students, young adults at this point, and placing them in various jobs, many of which are in these communities, the three towns. So.
And facilities, Greg, again.
Yes, the Facilities Committee has not met since last month. We are meeting on the 18th. In the interim, of course, you know about the New Year's Day leak that occurred. And as a result of that, there was some water infiltration into the building. That water infiltration was primarily in the area of the restroom outside, between the hallway, between the athletic facilities and the theater, and also rolling down that hallway and into the theater, where it puddled at the bottom in front of the stage. And that water was fairly quickly discovered because the leak set off a fire alarm because the areas that the sensors got filled with water and then alarmed. And Don was able to get one of our Region 12 employees into the building as soon as that, within 10 minutes of that, I understand. And then Don arrived. He was on his way. He had heard about the alarm and he was on his way, but he got someone here that discovered the leak, and it was quickly remedied, dried. Our insurance consultants, insurance agents were advised, and that was dealt with. So that has been cleaned up, and we are checking it to make sure that we don't have any residual issues relating from the I'm less doubt. I doubt there will be issues of water infiltration under the carpet. I put in quotes the resilient flooring in the hallway. I'm more concerned about what might happen in the auditorium as a result of water infiltration on the older style carpet. So we're looking into that, and we'll have a report at some point in the future.
Okay.
Michelle?
Back to you. There's a question.
I was just wondering if you knew, I just heard that throughout this week there was another water issue in the art room and that the heat wasn't working, and so I was just wondering if that's all been resolved.
Now, I believe it has. I haven't heard much about that yet. We had a chance really to speak with Don about that because we've had other issues on our agenda to discuss. But Bob, maybe you know something about it.
Yeah, the heat issues have been resolved. That's, it's just been so cold. And the one pipe that we actually had a problem with is on an exterior wall, and it froze and it cracked, and we had some water in that room, but the extent of the damage was very minimal in the overall scheme of things, and they're just now getting in the process of reordering what they need to reorder for the supply standpoint, but the rest of it is pretty well under control. And it's expected that in the spring or early summer, they're going to probably end up rerouting that pipe that's on that exterior wall. That's happened in the past in this building, and sometimes these pipes aren't where we believe they're to be. Okay?
Thank you.
Just another question. You mentioned that our insurance agent had been contacted. Are we fully covered for the damage or partially covered?
Well, I'd ask Bob to do that.
There's a
He's familiar with
deductible,
the policy.
as in any insurance policy, and our deductible is approximately $25,000 for that particular hallway issue. The one in the art room, it's never going to approach that. So they're two distinct things. The insurance company was called by myself from my house. We talked on the way in here. I had calls back and forth, and we got J.P. McGuire to come, and they're a restoration company. They assisted, and the custodians did a great job. By the time we got here, they were well on their way of cleaning up the mess, if you will, because it really was a mess. But if you looked at it today, you wouldn't even see that it was a mess. So it's shocking how quickly these custodians got on top of that thing.
So the 25,000 deductible plus about how much damage on the art room side, Bob?
Sorry, but we don't even have the
The numbers yet?
numbers yet. I mean,
Okay.
they're still going through the process of getting.
From your
costs.
perspective, though, that would
It's
be
not gonna
covered
be.
with what we have set aside for?
Yeah, it's negligible.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add to the report that I just heard this evening of another leak. There may be a leak over at Burnham related to a restroom. So Don has been dealing with that this afternoon in addition to dealing with two meetings at the same time. So he's multitasking. I want to say that for the record and for people's knowledge that I can't really express more gratitude than for the really diligent and fine work of our custodial staff and our director of facilities. Without these quick responses, we wouldn't be in the position we're in frequently. And the idea of having someone local who can immediately get into the building and does that, it tells you that the degree to which people on a holiday will take the time and do the work necessary to to keep us running and up to snuff. So I think that really is a tremendously commendable thing. And this, of course, was New Year's Day, so that was that was something that they really did to make sure that we were in good shape. So I want to give them all the praise that we possibly can heap on them for that. I think it was absolutely tremendous work. And I think I asked one of the questions I asked Don was, I said, well, since the hallway got hit with water, do you see any noticeable? Do we have any stains on the resilient flooring that are out in the hallway? And he said, once it was dry, you'd have no idea it ever happened. So there you go. Yeah. It worked, and of course you remember that that resilient flooring is designed to be like a nylon carpet above, a rubber membrane underneath, which completely seals moisture coming down through to prevent mold underneath, and moisture coming up from below to prevent mold in the carpet, in the resilient flooring. So that's the way it's designed, to create an impermeable membrane between the flooring and the building envelope. And we believe it worked. We're looking at it. We're verifying that. We're checking it. We may have them come in and look at it, pull up a corner or something to make sure it worked as advertised. But this is the first opportunity we've had to see how that works. and it appears to have worked beautifully. So again, I can't tell you how good that is, and I know at least one town hall in the region seems to have used the same material because they were so impressed by it. And again, we saw that material displayed in a high school in Connecticut where it had been there for 20 years, and you couldn't hardly tell the difference between the 20-year-old and the brand new stuff that had been laid. So it's good stuff. We're very pleased with its performance so far.
Is there an issue as far as the cause of the leak over the gym and the auditorium?
I believe that's still under assessment. I believe it was a rooftop unit or something that
It was a valve that they.
or valve. I'm sorry, right? Yeah.
Valve that was put in the system to regulate the flow of water, and it appears that that valve, which was a brand-new valve, failed and caused the issue. It wasn't a frozen, it was a failed new valve, basically, which I suppose happens to anybody. We just happen to catch it.
Well, I guess my question has to do with the fact that whether that valve is someone else's responsibility to
Could be.
have somebody cover.
It could very well be,
deductible.
Alan, and that's the subrogation issue between our insurance company at this point and the contractors.
Okay.
And
And they're going
you know,
through that.
they'll hassle that out. We let the insurance people deal with their issues.
Yeah.
I had raised actually every one of those questions with Don when I found out about it, and the answer was that he and Bob have it under control, and they were dealing with all of those issues, so they were on top of it. And it was nice to ask the questions, but it could have, if I hadn't, it still would have gotten done. So
Pro forma anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
John, did you have a question?
That was exactly
Oh,
the question.
okay.
Pause.
Anybody else? Okay, Michelle,
Thank you.
finance.
All right, we met right before this meeting, and we met with Charlie Heaven to go over the audit, which was what we spent our entire meeting on. The audit is later on the agenda, so we can speak of it then, I guess?
Sure.
All right.
Okay, long-range planning, we haven't met. As I keep saying, we're waiting until the short-range things happen for us to begin a new long-range plan. Negotiations, Greg, anything underway?
we have nothing pending at the present time.
Okay, and Michelle, policies are also on the agenda. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. We continue to meet, and the product of our work is on our agenda.
Okay. But now we're already at agenda item number 1, E1, so we get to talk about the audit.
All right, I'll just give a few highlights of the audit. Everyone should have received, we just got a hard copy right here, and it was in your electronic packet as well. So you may or may not have had an opportunity to take a look at that. But some of the highlights from the meeting I'll go over, and then if you have any questions regarding the audit. I think that to start with, though, it was a clean, unmodified audit, no exceptions. There were no material weaknesses found, as has been historically happening. Our central business office has done a fantastic job of working with the auditor, answering all their questions, providing all the materials needed so that we have a clean audit to present to you. We went through first just a lot of the process. Charlie explained to us, they start May, June, and they go through all of the books and explained sort of how they do spot checks of all of the different accounts that we have. If you look at the audit that you were given, the first several pages are the summary. One point in the highlights on page 3, if you look under financial highlights down towards the bottom, the first bullet, it said that our overall net expenditures exceeded our gross revenue, which usually is sort of a red flag, but Charlie explained to us that we had some encumbered purchase orders from the prior year that were then spent. So for accounting purposes, the dollars were spent in this audit year, so that's how we exceeded the budget. It was money from the prior year's budget that had been encumbered. There are only a couple of other things that I guess I would point out, and then just see if there are any questions. If you look on page 6, there is it shows up in several places in the audit, and it's sort of it's an auditor's accounting procedure. So if you look under operating grants and contributions, $3,666,000 as revenue, it is actually offset by that exact same amount under expenses, under employee benefits. Several times in the audit, we are required to show the cost of the state state retirement for teachers. It is not an expense that is ours now, but we know that the state has talked about returning, having the towns cover part or all of that liability. So included in that is the teacher's retirement and the retired teachers' health insurance, which they are allowed to take, but then pay for themselves. So these are two potential liabilities, I guess I would call them, but for accounting purposes, they are put as a revenue and an expense. So it's an in and out with a net zero. They show up on this page and several other pages. So if you see that and you're kind of wondering why that doesn't match our operating expenses, it's because it doesn't. We don't have to account for that in our operating at the moment, but that is something that we need to keep an eye on. I think there was one other thing I wanted to point out. Let's see. Was it the net position? So if you look on page 12, you'll see the change in net position towards the bottom of the page in parentheses, the 364,000. That's again the encumbered from the previous year that is showing up there. We also, the miscellaneous revenues, we talked a little bit about some unfulfilled purchase orders that were put through potentially as a round number, for example, $1,000, but then only 800 of it was needed, so there's leftover. So that's where that miscellaneous from the previous year purchase orders shows up. Another point that we should just make, which is way towards the back, I think it's like page 42?
The important
Well,
thing-
that's an important page. No, but before we get to 42, that's the last thing. I thought it was 46. Let's see. That's only part of it. I forget where the rest of it is. But it's the part of the retirement plan that we operate for the non-certified staff is in excellent shape. Right before it. 45 and 46. So we are almost completely fully funded. We have great returns. So the retirement fund that we run is in excellent shape, and we've done a good job of making sure we changed the assumptions on our plan last year, and then we accounted for that in our budget and increased our contributions. So between the increase in our contributions as well as the returns that we had this year, we made up the difference that we had seen from the year before. So 95%,
We're 95% funded.
Yeah, 95% funded on that. So then 42 would be the last page I was going to talk about, which is the amount of money going back to the towns. If you add the 18,000 of excess revenue and the 23,000 and change of leftover expenditures, we have a total of 42,222 going back to the towns for our last year. And I think those are all the highlights that I wanted to point out. I don't know if anyone else on the finance committee wanted to point something out, or if there were questions about the audit. If there are no questions, we need to, I believe we
A
need
motion to accept?
accept
Motion
it.
to accept it?
Yeah.
Anyone? Thank you. We have a second.
I'll second.
Michael has made the motion, and Jen is seconding. Any more discussion? All in favor to accept the fiscal year 2017 Region 12 Annual Audit Report as recommended by the Finance Committee? All in favor, please raise your hands. All against, please raise your hands. Any abstaining, please raise your hands. It's unanimous from all present.
Alan,
And-
I just want to thank everybody in that central office, in all the schools. They made this possible. They put in a lot of work all year long. I get to sit here and say, gee, we're going to return that, but it's through their hard work and their diligence that it gets done.
The principals and the administrators who
All of them.
keep the beans straight so the bean counters can look at them happily and write about them.
I have the word no. Unfortunately, I guess.
Hey, look who's here. Okay, we are at E2, Ag STEM update, and I will turn the meeting over to Anthony, who has arrived at 6:38 for the secretary's notice. We just covered the audit.
Guess I should have my glasses, that would help, huh?
And while we're at it,
Kidding.
we can pass these around this side of the table.
Yeah, start down there. I'm sorry. All right, so we're on the Ag STEM update, is that? Or, evening, everyone. Bob?
Yeah, the only
Would,
change,
please.
the only change in the Ag STEM monthly report is that we made the payments to FS&M that were previously approved, and we're still waiting on two bills that are pending receipt and approval. So virtually, there's no change in this report at this point in time. Anthony asked me to look into the financial model that we did previously, and in looking at it, does any major change in that will come when we get bids in on the work. The interest assumptions have remained well within what we put into that model. The most recent sales haven't exceeded what we had anticipated, so that model really doesn't have significant changes to be made, but will be made when we get more data as we get information from the bidding.
So that,
Hope that
that model,
answers
Bob,
your
was it 5.1?
Yeah,
So that,
that's what I looked over, and there's not enough significant change to waste a lot of time on it.
yeah, no, I wasn't,
Right.
right, the intent was not to recycle it unless there's something material, and,
At this point, when we get the actual bids in, we'll know better.
okay, thank you. Is that it, Bob?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. And there was no change to the existing The payment schedule?
Nope,
Okay.
just the one paid that we paid,
Okay,
$36.50. We haven't gotten anything new in yet.
thank you. Greg?
Well, I gave a report under Building Committee, which pretty much catches us up to date on the process. We're in that quiescent period while we're completing the revised schematic and the revised design development plans. And so there really isn't anything further to report up to this point. I did take a quick look at that schedule, the revised schedule that was distributed tonight. It appears that it's roughly the same place as the last schedule. It's expressed slightly differently. So I had to look at it, but it pretty much is still we're still on target for opening of the program in the fall of 2019, according to the January 5th schedule presented to us by our construction manager. We'll obviously know more when we complete the construction documents and they put the job out to bid.
So the January 5th schedule, when is,
Just got it tonight.
okay,
It's a revised January 5, 2018 critical path schedule of construction document, and it's virtually the same as the last one that was passed out, except for the way it expressed things. It's just the way they colored them and whatnot, but it's pretty much, it's getting a little bit easier to read, but it's pretty much the same schedule.
your expectation is it'll be ready to share with the board at large at the next meeting?
Yeah, literally just got it tonight, so we'll get it out. We'll get it. He's going to send me the electronic version, so we'll get it to be distributed.
Okay. Are there any questions for Greg? Or Bob at this point? Okay. Let's move on to policies. Michelle, with second reading, we'll start there.
Yes. All right, so we have a second reading of policy 4118.11, personnel non-discrimination. I'm just going to pull that up. There were no changes from what was presented at our original meeting. So the strikeouts that are there, those were strikeouts that are now handled under regulations, procedures, or in the handbook. Very, very little addition to this policy.
Are there any questions for Michelle? Okay. Do I have a motion? Greg?
Motion to approve for second reading, proposed policy 4118.11.
Second? Thank you, Michael. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes unanimously to adopt policy 4118.11, personnel and non-discrimination. So, next policy?
All right, next policy is also a second reading, 5145.4, non-discrimination. If you open in the packet in the order that they were sent to us, you'll see that it says in yellow at the top, a complete replacement of the current policy. There were changes made to this policy as suggested by CABE. This is now really an Americans with Disabilities Act policy, and some of the language that was in our old policy, handling of grievances, et cetera, were moved into, they're in regulation, either in our regulations or in procedure manuals. So this update brings us up to date with CABE's recommendations, and the language that was struck is covered in other policies or other places in our handbook. And there were no suggested changes from last meeting.
Are there any questions? If not, can I have a motion? Okay.
Michelle, do you have a sense of, I was having trouble following these two to try to figure out precisely what, I mean, maybe not precisely, but in general, what really changed?
I think procedurally, not a lot changed. This is more of a cleaning up. This policy now really deals with the American with Disabilities Act, and language that had previously been in the policy that belonged in other places was moved out. So it's just keeping us in alignment with CABE so that when they send us their updates, the policies that we're looking at are most current and reflect the language that they are using. Because as the policy manual grows, what used to be in one policy is now sometimes dealt in two separate policies, and it's easier to maintain if we continue to match what they're doing.
Yeah, my concern is, though, that we did not get a marked version to show us what had changed. And it appears to be largely the same policy, at least these two, unless I'm mistaking these for something else. But I'm running through it, and they look like, I mean, it looks like it takes the same general headlines, the same general areas of coverage, and I just wondered if anything changed. Did we add additional obligations on the part of the region? You know, it's difficult to know without seeing a marked version of it.
Right.
Changed.
If we go, I'm trying to remember, in the first time we saw this, bear with me here. I'll move off to an old 5145, because we did .4. So in our business packet from 12/4/17, when we saw this, we show the Region 12, the old version, public access to facilities was sort of what it was called. But in that policy, there was a section called on-campus recruitment, which is now under our directory policy. So it didn't. This new policy didn't add language as much as it cut things from the old that are now covered in other policies. I believe there was like one. Oh boy, let me move back to the current agenda. Wasn't there like one tiny little highlight? I could be wrong.
I didn't see anything
Okay.
highlighted.
That was a different policy.
The only thing that had
there's-
highlights was in the one from 12/4. That had some strikeouts and replacements of the titles of 3 statutes.
Right.
And I don't know why that changed. I mean, it must have been errors from the previous one, because I don't think they've recodified the general statutes. So I don't know why this.
No, so this is more of a cleaning up. Like I said, the grievance. There was a grievance section that is really procedural. That belongs in the handbook. There was the directory section, which or the on-campus recruitment, which belongs in our other policies. So there's no additional language. It is just a cleaning up of the Americans with Disabilities, so that this policy deals only with that one topic.
Okay. I just would renew my request from a previous meeting that when we modify a policy, even if there's substantial, it says it's a complete replacement of current policy, but it doesn't appear to have changed radically. And the question is, it would be nice if we could have marked versions of these things when there are changes made.
Well, the marked version is with when we had the first reading.
I didn't
So-
see it.
so-
There was only 3 things marked in that first version, and those 3 things were the statutes, the titles that they're under. I don't know why that changed, because one would think that Title 10 is education. You wouldn't have needed to change that, but that's the only thing marked on that first one, unless I somehow missed it. But
There were a lot of strikeouts, but
Well, I think it's also one of the situations where there was so much changed. When there is a complete rewrite, we don't usually. The strikeouts were in between the complete rewrite and the version brought to us, and we didn't present the strikeouts because I guess we should present the existing 5145.4 which is, as Michelle's been saying, is an entirely different document, simply in its composition. Obviously, not in what it covers. And when if we were to redline those two, everything would be rearranged. The part of the greatest difference in this is the fact that it's really addressing as ADA and taking out a somewhat antiquated term of public access to facilities. And as Michelle said, taking out anything that has to do with the recruitment. But then on top of that, the coordinator, the designation of coordinator for 5004 activities as Director of Pupil Personnel Services, that's the same, but it's in a different area. And where there are a lot of procedures in the previous document, obviously we try to keep some procedures, or the bulk of procedures, out of our policy now. That's really been replaced by a great deal of definitions, which didn't exist in the original 5145.4. So when you have a policy that is more effectively dealing with the subject at hand using entirely different words, it's a little rough on your eyes to redline. Maybe, when we do a redo, I think what you were saying was when we first presented this, we presented our existing 5145.4, that although it's tricky on screens, you would have to look at that and then click back over and look at the new one, just to assure yourself that it's a complete rewrite and that these paragraphs are either omitted or covered in a different way or replaced by definitions.
Also, just procedurally, Greg, when we have a policy that has all new language, Teresa and I usually sit down in one of our organizational meetings, and she'll have one copy and I'll have another, and we'll read something and we'll look for it. We match it, and we put little checks to make sure. So if there's any new language, that will be highlighted. So when we present a whole new, it's either completely new because we've never had it before, or in this case, it's the same, it's just rearranged. It's just in different orders. So it's not a new, if there's new language, a new requirement, anything that would be a new requirement, for example, we would highlight if we're going from an old to a new policy. This one was just completely rearranged.
Yeah, Greg, if you want to look under the folder, shared folder Business 11-6-17, which is 2 months ago, that was when it was brought to first reading, and you'll see there in the center, right smack in the center of the second row in the documentation, you'll see 5145.4 with the new language, and then you'll see the existing Region 12 right next to it, and that should be able to give you an idea of what we covered in that meeting as to the fact that it was grossly a rewrite and that the original was presented there.
All right, can I also add to my request? I really don't care for a marked draft that consists of things highlighted. It should show strikeouts with strikeouts. It should show additions being underlined. I mean, it should be in some standard format that people can figure it out, because I don't know what highlighting it means. Does that mean it was added, or?
That's new. Strikeouts are what was there previously.
I don't see anything stricken. That's why you said there were a lot of strikeouts. I just see new language, but no strikeouts. And so it does raise an issue of why we use this highlighting system rather than the standard strikeout, and other than the fact that we insist on using this particular iteration of doc preparation instead of what Microsoft Word like the rest of the world uses. But I really think we should seriously give some consideration to actually showing something someone can understand. Because I see no strikeouts. I cannot tell what was removed from this policy.
Those are from previous. They are not here. We're on the second reading, but. Yeah, and
no, I'm looking at the 11.6 version, and I see highlighted language. I mean, I'm not complaining about the job that the policy committee is doing. I'm complaining about the lack of something that's intelligible coming in here on these documents, and it happens because we insist on using this particular document preparation software that no one else but educational institutions use. And we should use what the rest of the world uses because it's clear as to what it means. And it should follow through the whole time. It should always, every edition of the board that we see the policy should contain the strikeouts and additions, because that way we can make sure that we understand precisely what we're doing. I'm concerned about these things because even though CABE has looked at it and gone through it, these policies create potential obligations for the district to follow them. And if we don't know what's in them, I can't vote for them. I can only vote them down. I can't vote them up if I'm not sure what's in it and why it's in it. So that's all I'm saying. I would really like to see, I've asked for this on multiple occasions, and I'm still getting highlighted documents and not properly
Greg, I hear what
marked
you're,
documents.
I hear what you're saying. We've been consistent, and the highlights are new, and the strikeouts are old. I personally like the highlights because my eyes can jump to them and I see them. It's easy to find the new language, and we have been consistent with that. So I'm sorry it's difficult for you to follow it, but it shows the progress of the committee. Every time we have a first reading, we give the old, the new. We clean up changes that are suggested from a first to a second. Occasionally, we have had issues with that in attaching the wrong copy because there are so many versions, and we usually catch that. But
Michelle,
we've
question.
been consistent.
If I
Yes.
can. How are these changes communicated to us from CABE? What are they using? What format do they use? Are they using,
Word. Yeah, they highlight.
so this, okay,
It's coming from CABE.
it's coming from CABE.
And I would also like to just say that there's a lot of administrative work going on to create these folders and keep track of the versions between what CABE is sending us and what the committee puts in. So to then create a whole nother format, it would be hours of work, because it already is hours of work. And then tracking it to make sure that once it's approved here, that it's cleaned up and that the correct version gets put on the website. We have spreadsheets with multiple steps to follow through between committee and first reading and second reading, and going back to clean up and then going back to CABE and getting posted to the website. It's a very cumbersome process as it is, and keeping the folders straight and the versions straight requires a lot of time.
If I could, to maybe help move this along, because we got a few more first readings to get through. So we have this particular policy that has been vetted by the policy committee and presented to the board with a recommendation to the board from the policy committee to adopt the policy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what's in front of us. At this point, I think we should move it forward. So do I have a motion? Michael?
I'd like to move that we accept policy 5145.4, the second reading for the non-discrimination policy. I'd like to move that we accept policy 5145.4, non-discrimination, the second reading.
Second.
Thank you. All right, all those in, any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. All those abstain? Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. The second reading to adopt policy 5145.4, non-discrimination. Next.
Yes, so the next is a first reading, policy 0521, goals, non-discrimination, equity, Title IX. If you open this, you will see the yellow is the new language coming from CABE. You'll see a green, which is was added by the policy committee, I believe, on this case. We use another color to show what we've added. The strikeouts are what was in our policy and has been struck. These recommendations are all coming from CABE. You'll see down at the bottom the highlights of the new legal references for this policy. We talked about this in committee. I don't want to say at length, but a fair amount to look at the language. You can see we had issue with a couple of the words that CABE chose, and we changed those in committee, and so that would be the green.
Any questions? Discussion? If not, do I have a motion? Please, go ahead.
I think I got it. So I'm reading this quickly, but who do students or people go to if they have a discrimination complaint? Did you just say Oprah?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, please.
I don't believe this. Yeah, I was to say this. It's weird. The zeros in the policy manual are, as you can see, under missions, goals, and objectives. So these are broad statements.
Okay.
So they aren't usually very prescriptive in that sense. If I can look, but I feel pretty confident. If you'll see, I mean, we had non-discrimination in the
Well, yeah,
5,000s
it's
and
the same one.
4,000s.
It's the same one, and it basically just says the superintendent shall appoint and make known the individuals to contact on issues. But that's obviously going to be elsewhere, either on the website or the handbook or in other media other than in this policy. But it basically instructs, almost, if you look almost at the bottom of the first page.
Okay, so do we have someone appointed for that? And who is that?
Mrs. DeBrito is the, is it under Title IX? Is that? Oh, Ally O'Hara, okay. So it's Ally, and then Teresa also handles it. In the schools, there are different key people. It usually works through the guidance counseling office. Staff will always go to the administration. They always know that if they don't want to go to the administration, that they come to central office. We have pretty fluid communication lines where I think people feel pretty open to complain if they need to.
And do the students know who they would go to?
Oh, yeah, well, we have parts of Second Step where they talk about that, especially in middle school. The elementary schools, we have anti-bullying programs, and, there's boxes in the office where you could put a little note, all of that kind of stuff.
Great, thanks.
Greg?
Yes, I have a question, and it deals with language at the beginning of at the end of the first paragraph. What is a designated youth group? It's not defined in the policy.
Yeah. I was just to say designated.
It's where it says the district provides equal access to all. It used to say to the Boy Scouts and other designated youth groups, and it's stricken the words the Boy Scouts and others. So it says the district provides equal access to all designated youth groups.
I think designated in this sense, or the way the committee took it, is that any sort of any recognized youth group, if they've come forward, for example, to use the building, they have proof of insurance or whatever. They're an organization. So,
Does that mean we would allow an organization to use the building if they explicitly were actually engaged in a policy of harassment of people based on their gender expression or sexual orientation or race or color or any of these other categories? Because it says we give access to all designated youth groups, yet it's in the context of a policy that says that we will promote non-discrimination in an environment free of harassment. And there have been, I'm sure, groups in the country at various times that have not taken the most enlightened view on all of these suspect classifications that are listed in here. It depends on what time in history you look. You go back far enough, you'll find racial discrimination in these groups. You come to the more present day, and you see things based on sexual orientation, gender expression, and the like. So the question really is that what appears to be a throwaway sentence at the end of paragraph 1, does that potentially completely negate the entirety of paragraph 1? if you get a group that you're required to provide access to, notwithstanding the fact that they might promote an atmosphere of discrimination based on suspect classifications.
That is a good question. How do you feel, Alan?
What do you think? Obviously, it's a policy about non-discrimination. Therefore, I think the difference is we're not talking about individuals. So much of this has to do with individuals, but we're talking about groups, and therefore the groups would have to comply with the rest of the policy. Not that that sentence, expanding from individuals to groups, would naturally give the groups any kind of permission to discriminate that is not given to individuals.
Doesn't say that. And the concern I would have is that if you had a group that wanted access, and that group was not a group that adhered to these things, they might say, look, your policy says you're going to provide equal access and not discriminate against us. That's what this is about, you not discriminating against our group, even though our group promotes discrimination based on, I don't know, what television shows you watch or something. I mean, you're trying to use something that doesn't pick on one of the suspect classes. But I really think that although it appears to be a throwaway line, it could actually force you to give access to a group that does not believe in these things and causes you to frustrate the very policy that it appears in. I'm not a civil rights lawyer. I don't even play one on TV, but it does appear that this is inconsistent potentially inconsistent, and I don't think anyone focused on it because I don't think anyone was attempting to say, well, we should allow groups that promote racial hatred or whatever, or animus, to have access to the school, but yet that's how these issues come up before courts. Someone says, you didn't give my group access, you discriminated against me, and yes, I have pretty violent and opposing views, but guess what? You said you wouldn't discriminate.
Michael?
I'm not a lawyer, so I can't cite the legal ruling on this one, but I do know that the administration has broad powers to stop any student group that is using hate speech, because that would conflict with the priority to provide learning, a safe learning environment. If hate speech was providing unsafe learning environment, they could block any group from speaking, from meeting, using the school facilities at any point. So, and that I know has come up before, I believe, even the Supreme Court.
Any other comments, questions? Want to move to first reading, or
I'll make a motion.
motion? Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, I move that this be sent back to council to look at that provision for the purpose of determining whether or not it's inconsistent with the policy and could obligate us to provide access to groups which do not adhere to the spirit or content of the policy.
Do we need that as a motion, Greg, or is that just a suggestion to come back on the second reading? I'm sorry.
Well, I do think, I just want to just say, because I'm hearing what you're saying, Greg, and it's interesting to me. We're required to not discriminate, and we have said that we will provide equal access, and I don't know how involved the school board has been in the past in actually reviewing the activities of the groups that use their buildings. They have sporting, youth sports, youth music, youth, religious studies, all sorts of people use the building. And as long as their insurance is in place, I don't know that we actually have spent much time looking at their internal practices. I don't know if we want to, but that I understand your question, because it does appear that by providing equal access to all, we could have to provide access to groups that some would find we would prefer not to provide access, our buildings, because for the very fact that they are discriminating in and on themselves. So we can certainly take it back to committee.
Yeah, I just would like to not find out the answer after a bill for $500,000 in legal fees to determine it. I mean, I'm not suggesting this is ever going to hit us, but this is the kind of thing where a policy comes up, we have what we think is a throwaway line, and then it ends up as the subject of litigation. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but there are a lot of stuff going on in our country these days where different groups are expressing different views. And I think that before a school adds a policy that requires equal access while saying that you expect that this is the atmosphere we're going to foster, someone could decide that this is an appropriate place to test, the courage of our convictions. And that's why I just think someone should look at it who knows more about this. I mean, I'm a practicing lawyer, but I'm not a civil rights lawyer, and I don't handle these kinds of cases. But I'm sure that, our counsel has people that do, and I just would like to make sure that this line doesn't need a little massaging to for example, if you wanted to say, well, we want to reserve the right not to allow groups to use it who don't adhere to these, maybe you can't do that. Or maybe you need to do that, or maybe you don't. I don't know. Maybe they would tell you don't have to worry because any group that, but groups have free speech rights. And if you look at the cases, and I've read them, many of the cases that the United States Supreme Court defined the rights to freedom of speech, mostly in the 40s and 50s. If you read those cases, you're going to see, if you read the underlying speech that was at issue, it's pretty nasty stuff. In fact, it's sickening in some cases to us and our sensibilities today. And and many of those people who were expressing that horrid speech were being represented by groups like, various types of pro-free speech groups, and American Civil Liberties Union and others. And the Supreme Court decided that as objectionable and as obnoxious as that speech is, in a society that has a First Amendment that prohibits government action against the free exercise of speech, you have to tolerate it, you have to live with it, you have to hear it, and you have to allow it. Now, public schools may be slightly different, and I don't pretend to know any longer the extent to that, but at least the policy should reflect what our rights and options are to make sure that we properly adhere to it, because this could have large consequences. Free speech cases are expensive, and I really don't want to see a U.S. Supreme Court case with Region 12 as one of the parties, particularly as a defendant. And so that's why I think it's important to look at this. And I'm sorry to make what appears to be too much of this, but the freedom of speech is probably the most precious right we have, and it's the difference between the kind of country we think of America as being and the kind of country it would be without it. And I don't think we should treat these things lightly.
I'm sort of lost here, not on the points you've made, Greg, but on where we are in terms of process. Did you have a motion on the floor, or are you withdrawing the first reading? Somebody help me and
I don't
figure out
think we
where we
actually
are.
moved, we discussed, we didn't actually,
Well, I thought he may have made a motion.
did you make a motion?
I did. I made a motion to send it back to committee.
Which is what happens if we don't move on it, but that's fine.
Wanna make the-
So,
you wanna just
yeah,
withdraw the first reading, or do we go with the motion?
Either way.
You don't have to
Greg, have the
withdraw. You can
motions on the
just, if
floor?
no one made a motion, I will withdraw my motion. If no one makes a motion to approve it for a first reading. Otherwise, I'd like my motion to stand, so.
Was there a motion?
No.
There was no motion.
45 minutes to discuss that.
Okay. So the reading, first reading is withdrawn? Yes? The first reading on this?
Yeah,
gonna
it's
go
coming
back
back
to
to
committee.
committee. We will ask about that. I understand your question, Greg. Got
All
it.
right.
All right.
We go to the next one, please. Thank you.
Yep. All right. First reading policy 5118.1, students, homeless students. Oh, let me pull this up. All right. There is new language. I believe it's number 7 if you scroll down. Mine's being slow. Okay, number 7. It's just an update talking about a student's records. It says the board will provide any homeless student who is not in the physical custody of a parent guardian full access to his or her educational records, including medical records, in the board's possession. This is new language required by law. You'll see the legal references updated at the bottom. An act concerning access to student records for certain unaccompanied youths. That's all the change.
Any questions, John?
Yes, just out of curiosity, any occurrence of a homeless student in this district?
I know we have in the past. I don't know if we have any at the moment.
We do,
We do. Okay.
we do.
Totally homeless.
I'm sorry?
Totally homeless.
Homeless, yes.
Greg?
Yeah, the question I have, and I read this quickly, so maybe I missed something here, but we have an obligation to educate every student who lives within Region 12, right? So the question is, if you are homeless, how do you live within Region 12? I don't, does this mean that anyone who presents themselves to the school and saying, I am homeless and I am living somewhere in your town, because, you know, you literally, if I know in school districts right now, they ask a question when someone enrolls, what's your address? And if you're in Region 12 and you give an address outside of one of the 3 towns, you don't get enrolled except as a tuition student if you meet one of the tuition programs we have. So if I can guarantee you, if every person who is designated as homeless has to be admitted, wouldn't people then claim that status if you didn't let them in without tuition? I don't quite understand how you regulate that.
So
And maybe I missed it.
if you look on the first page, number 1, school of origin is I mean, it can get a little dicey at times, and that's where the administration has to sort things out. But the school of origin is where the student attended when permanently housed. So if they lived here at one point, but they lose their housing,
Immediately preceding them becoming homeless, they can't claim homelessness because they lived here 5 years ago. Homelessness.
Point of order.
I'm sorry.
We have
I'm sorry.
18 minutes left in the, 13 minutes left in this meeting, and we have schedule dependent on visitors at 7:30. This is in a policy which is already complete and in our records. The answers are all there. We're only looking at one paragraph that amends that. We really can't get into the subject of homelessness in our school system because it's not really germane to this. We need to keep moving on with our schedule.
Well,
Well, look, the meeting will end at 7:30 sharp to accommodate our guests, so we will get as far as we can get, and whatever we don't get to will be moved to another meeting. To that end, I do think the point made was accurate in that, you know, it is a first reading, it is an existing policy. You know, I don't think we should get into a protracted debate. If the action is to go back and answer the question, then let's push it back to committee and move on in the essence of time. So, Greg?
I mean, I understand that we want to move on with the pressing business, and I understand that really this is trying to just deal with the issue of whether or not they have access and giving them access to their records, and I have no objection to that at all. The amendment to the policy doesn't bother me. The policy itself, however, is problematic, and I think it ought to be repealed and returned to committee to be worked on before it becomes a policy again. Because what it does say is, I know you say that it says we look to the school of origin where the student attended when permanently housed, or the school of last enrollment. That could be 5 years ago. It doesn't have to be this year. Second, it says that's only one clause, or provided in the school that is attended by other students living in the same attendance area where the homeless child lives. But that begs the question. I really think this is a badly conceived policy that needs to be push through, look through, and try to make sure we understand who is admitted and who is not. Because again, what happens is that you get in the context of a contest as to whether someone should be admitted or not. And you know, you could end up in a situation where you're required to admit people who really are either not homeless here or don't live here, or you don't have clear standards on what it is. And I think the standards of where our responsibility lies are less than a model of clarity. And that's why I think this policy should be taken down and rethought and put up so that it accomplishes the purpose. Clearly, if there's a person who's homeless within our jurisdiction, that's what I think it's gathered to get at, but I'm not sure it says that.
We've got the point. Michelle?
I just wanted to say that most of this language we can't do anything about because it's based on state law. So you could kick it back to policy, but it's going to come back looking a lot like this because it is all based on state statute. So I would suggest that we approve this as proposed by the policy committee.
Is there a motion?
I'll move it. Or you can move it. But I mean, I'm not objecting to
One
the
of us move
policy.
it.
Okay,
You move, I'll second.
okay.
Call it a day. Okay.
Any questions? All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed? All those abstained. Motion passes for first reading on 5118.1 as presented. Next.
All right, next policy. 5141.213, students administering medications. Let me pull it up. This is a brand-new policy. We have several policy, don't be confused by administering medication. There are several administering medication policies that we bring forward and discuss annually, it seems like. But this is .213, a policy of its own dealing with opioid overdose and the administration of naloxone or Narcan, which is, I think, I forget which is the generic and which is the drug. But anyway, this policy was written by CABE. It is in effect in several other districts. We brought this forward. Our school nurse actually requested, came to us asking about this because it was not covered in previous policies and it's becoming an issue, not necessarily in our district at the moment, but it's a national issue. I'm pretty sure we've all heard of. Our school nurse has discussed this policy with our school medical advisor. Also, Teresa let me know that because we had some questions when we were discussing it in policy about who should be able to administer, and she did have Gary Brochu review it, and the recommendation is just the school nurse. Is that correct? Am I getting that right? Oh, Vince did. Gary looked at a different one. So CABE's, the way the policy is written in CABE's policy, people say it is just the school nurse that is authorized to use this drug. So this is a policy that would allow us to have the Narcan on site in the nurse's office to be administered during school hours by the nurse, if the need were to arise. And it allows her to administer this to a student or an adult, whether they are part or a visitor to the school, if they're here during school hours.
Michelle?
Yes.
Does our safety officer have the ability, are they trained as police officers to administer as well? And can they be added to this? Should they be added to this?
Okay, because we did talk about that in policy, and so we can choose to add that. I know some police officer, some towns are adding that to that. We would have to discuss that with our SRO and make sure that she's on board with the training. But we could add that if we wanted, as a board.
And does our nurse need to be certified or trained or go to any, they have to be trained?
She would.
And who certifies them, the state or the local officials or? Okay. And that's captured in here, the requirement? Okay. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, this drug is a life-saving drug, and it's saving lives all over the country, and I think that we should find the best way to make it available in these circumstances. I would hope that we, although CABE's counsel are very knowledgeable and smart people, I always think something like this should be run by our own, simply because, and I wasn't sure, I was confused as to whether our counsel...
Yeah, no, I thought we had sent this one to Gary, but we sent it.
Yeah, I think it's...
we did? Oh, he hasn't responded. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I
That's why I was
think we would.
confused.
I mean, I really think we will want that response because there, issues come up when you administer a drug, whether or not you're responsible or liable in the event of misadministration, in the event of administration under the wrong circumstances, misdiagnosis of the situation. I mean, there's a whole lot of things. It's not always like the person who who happens upon someone that's in distress, and there's some certain laws that sometimes protect those people that render aid, we need to make sure that we're comfortable that we're not going to have more legal bad results, or that we can somehow prevent them. That's the only reason why I think it should be reviewed by council.
And we have asked for it to be reviewed. As also, we talked about that in the policy committee, this is sort of at least a very good, solid first step. The nurse will be trained. She is asked about this. She's qualified to do this. We talked about after school hours, and whether it's the SRO or coaches, and that's just a whole nother realm, with liability. Where would it be stored? Who would have access to that? It just complicates things. So we want to start. We realize the importance of having it on site, on campus, and having the nurse trained to use it. And we can always revisit this in the future if we really feel that we need to expand the training to more staff. But this is where we felt that we should start.
My only concern is we should, before this is adopted as a policy or implemented, we should have the opinion of our council rendered on it. And if we have not heard from them, we should delay the implementation of this until we do, simply because it could have legal ramifications, and we need to make sure we're on the right side of it. I want to be able to offer this to someone who is in that position, because without it, they're going to die.
Absolutely.
And I think it's of
Why
an
we're
overdose,
taking
and
this
I think it's critical that we be able to do it. I just want to do it in the most responsible way possible. I think we owe that to the citizens of the region, and mostly importantly, we owe that to our children.
So we've asked for that review. Could we approve it for a first reading and hold on the second reading until we've got the input from the lawyer? Why not? Okay.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I would be happy to move the adoption of this as a first reading, and I'll make a motion statement, not part of the motion, which is that we really need to make sure it's been reviewed before we act on it for a second reading. That's my intent, but I'm going to move that we adopt it at first reading.
Don?
Could I have a question before we vote? Just what is the safety net at present?
Yeah, second, okay, go.
What is the present safety net for an overdose? EMTs or
911?
911? Okay. Yeah, we need this.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? All right, the motion passes unanimously on the first reading of 5141.213, students and administering medications, subject to legal review. Let's see, Michelle, can we get the last one in?
I think possibly, because this is a routine update. We can take a look at it. 6121.1, instruction, equal opportunity. If you want to just quick open it up. The yellow is what's new. You can see we struck 1998 and updated to 2011, and biannually after. This is a report that is required by the state, and some updated language. This is a report that is required by the state. There's really not any wiggle room in this.
Just out of curiosity, have we actually done a report on October 1, 2011, and biannually thereafter, 13, 15, 17? Good, thank you.
Yep.
We do this as part of our SSP every year, racial isolation, and it's in the SSP. If you read it, it's there.
What is it? SSP's school profile?
School profile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll move to adopt proposed policy 6121.1 as on a first reading.
Have a second? Thank you. Any further questions? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes unanimously for first reading on policy 6121.1, instruction and equal opportunity.
I'd like to move we go into executive session to discuss personnel matters.
All those in favor?
Wait, we need a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard Michael say second. Okay, I did. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, the motion is passed. We're in executive session at. Are we moving or are we going here? 7:30. Why don't